All right, hello Instagram and YouTube. Welcome to DAwithDA. Great to see you, Laura. Great to see you, Priscilla. Great to see you, HK Martin. Michelle, hello. Great to see everyone. Today is day 49. Day 49. Hello, Hush Jerome. Must be morning there now in Kenya. Hello, 5 Carsons 05. Sylvia, Gregory. Great to see you, Greg Knight. All right, great. Michelle, Grandma Alana. Oh, I like that. Sharon Stokes, great to see you. Like I said, Michelle, you love those purple hearts. Great to see you, Seth. Thank you for taking such great care of my family recently. All right, great to see you, Hannah. I knew you'd show up. Hello, Trisha. Hello, Cassandra. Good evening. Great to see you. You're probably tired after a long day. What, 10,000 steps you got day before yesterday? Congratulations. Oh, you're with the Mendez family, Christian. Great. Say hi to Daniel and everyone for me. Wow, this is fun. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 49 of DAwithDA. Hello, Denise. Hello, Trisha. Hello, Nicolina. Hello, Terry. Hello, Chromebook 181920. Whoever you are, Trust Faith 333, Penina Naya, Kids for Christ. Hello. All right, great. Kendra and Clayton, what? You've got to be kidding me. Okay, great to see everyone. So many friends and Rambler Cat. Where's Gabby Abby? I haven't seen Gabby Abby yet, but I love to say her name when she comes on. All right, hello everyone. My name is David Asscherick, as you probably well know. Today is day 49 of DAwithDA, and we've got 2 chapters in store for you today. We did not have a DAwithDA yesterday, not because I wouldn't have wanted to, but because I was traveling. I was driving with my wife from Salt Lake City to Denver. We purchased a car, and we had to drive that car back. And it was a great trip, beautiful time talking and connecting, listening to some great music, and enjoying our new car. So we didn't have time to do a DAwithDA yesterday, and I don't know if I mentioned this or not. I guess I didn't. I also learned that on the way back, or just before we started to head back, that my youngest son, Jabel, was diagnosed with COVID. And so he's back at the house right now, and he's not feeling great. Yesterday was the day after his diagnosis, and he had sort of mild symptoms, a mild headache, sort of listless, not a lot of energy. Today, he just feels really, really tired. And Violetta has already had COVID, and I haven't yet. So hopefully I won't get it, but I'm in the same house with Jabel, a very small house, in fact, and trying to stay away from him. So he's kind of like in prison in his own room upstairs. So please pray for Jabel and that he comes back to 100% and soon. He's 18 years old, so he should be fine. Statistically, he should be fine. But still, it's a serious illness, and I would really appreciate it if you'd pray for him. So already today, I've had an extremely busy day. I had 2 sessions this morning where I spoke to a conference that was taking place in Norway, a conference they call Reddit. And I don't remember what Reddit means, but it's something important in Norwegian. So I did a sermon for them, and then we had a Q&A time, which was super good. Then I had a short little break, about 45 minutes, and then I preached a sermon for my local church, but I couldn't be there, obviously, because at some point I'd been exposed to Jabel, so I did it via Zoom. So then I went back home, hung out with my wife, and now I'm back for my, 4th hour on some digital, Zoom type, Instagram type, and YouTube type technology. So I've had a busy day, a good day, and frankly, I'm on fire. I'm fired up. I hope you're fired up. We've got 2 great chapters in store for you today, and I don't really have a lot of announcements to make that I can think of, just that I'm so glad you're here. Today's day 49. This is our last day in the 4s. So tomorrow, we're going to be day 50. We're going to be in the 5s, and remember, this is only a 90-day challenge. So the whole thing is going to be over before we know it, and we're going to be crying in our soup. We're going to say, whoa, what happened to DAwithDA? And so we'll have to come up with another challenge. And I've already got some good ideas, and I've had some great suggestions. So if you have some good suggestions for what we could do next, and it doesn't have to be a 90-day challenge, it could be a 50-day challenge, it could be a 100-day challenge, it could be whatever. If you have some ideas of things that it would be fun to do, we've already done a fitness challenge in the past, the 100 Days with Pastor A, and we've done several reading challenges. So yeah, send me your ideas. I'd love to hear them. All right, so today we are in chapters 46 and 47. Both of these are short chapters. Both of these are short chapters. Gabby Abby, there you are. I was hoping you would sign on, and it looked like you said that you're in Colorado. We need to get together, DAwithDA, in Colorado. So you must live in Colorado. Okay, well, we need to connect. I need to learn more about Gabby Abby. Like I said, I need to be your friend so I can say Gabby Abby a lot. All right, so glad everyone is here. We're going to start in this chapter right here titled, He Was Transfigured. He was transfigured. Again, this is chapter 46, and it's based on, let's take a look here, Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. And I actually have a sermon that I was preaching, probably about 7 or 10 years ago, that I preached quite a few times on the Mount of Transfiguration. And I loved that sermon. I haven't preached it in many years, but it was significantly informed by this chapter. And one of the things that I noted in that sermon is that each of the gospel accounts, whether Luke 9 or Mark 9 or Matthew 17, each one brings a slightly different nuance to the story. And I think what we'll do is we'll read, let me see what I've got my marker to here. That's the Luke account. Let's read the Matthew account. I think that's what I've got here. No, the Mark one. Let's read the Matthew account only because we're coming out of Matthew chapter 16 that we did with Nathan. And I hope you enjoyed having Nathan on the program. That was just a total God thing, the way that worked out. Absolutely awesome to have spent some time with him. It was just like a whirlwind. We saw him, we hung out with him for a day, and we were out of there. But it was so cool we could do a DA with DA. But anyway, we were with Nathan on Matthew chapter 16, and that chapter was titled The Foreshadowing of the Cross. And maybe I should just say, well, we'll have prayer, and then I'll just get right into it, okay? So let's have a quick prayer. Father in heaven, I want to thank you for all of the participants, those that are live now and those that will watch and listen later from DAwithDA. Lord, this was just a burden that you laid on my heart, and it has been a gigantic blessing to me personally. And based on the testimonies that I'm hearing, it's been a huge testimony to hundreds and thousands of others. So, Father, be with us now as we take a look at 2 chapters, and especially as the Sabbath hours, at least here where I'm at, the Sabbath hours we're in the last sort of hour and a half of the Sabbath, and I just pray for those that are east or west that these closing hours of the Sabbath will just be extremely restful and restorative. So be with us now as we open the text of Scripture. May you open our hearts to the central themes and the personalized, the tailor-made themes that you have in store for us in these 2 chapters is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so he was transfigured. Chapter 46 in Desire of Ages. And what I was going to do there briefly is just remind ourselves of the tone, where we've come from out of Matthew chapter 16. Remember that Matthew chapter 16 is incredibly important. Like, let me just get down here to the bottom. Amazingly important. And the reason it's important is that Jesus' disciples have spent a significant amount of time with him, significant enough for them to now be persuaded, despite the opposition of the religious leaders and even the ups and downs of the fickle mob and crowd, they are persuaded Jesus is the Messiah. And so Jesus has put this question to them, who are people saying that I am? And he does this to purposefully set them up to give the right answer. Some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, some say you're one of the prophets. Okay, I am satisfied that you have given me an accurate representation of public opinion about me. Who do you say that I am? Peter speaks up, right? Being the one that was most likely to speak up and most often to speak up. He says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And that was the right answer. That was the right answer, to which Jesus says, happy are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Nobody taught you that. You didn't learn that from the religious leaders or from the scribes or from anyone else. God himself, my Father, taught you that by the Spirit. Okay. Then there's that pivotal verse, that crucial pivotal verse, verse 21. It says, from that time, And if you have your Bibles there, you should underline that. You should go find Matthew chapter 16, verse 21, and underline that phrase, from that time. Right? I've got it right here. This is Matthew chapter 16. I'll show it to you. From that time. Can you see that? From that time. A little harder to see on the Instagram, but there it is. From that time. Because what happens from that time is that Jesus begins to disabuse the disciples' mind of the prevailing and popular ideas about what Messiah would do. Jesus was powerful enough to be Messiah. He was wise enough to be Messiah. He said the right things. He did the right things. He healed. He taught. He was clearly a supernatural prophetic type figure, but there were still many aspects of him and his behavior that didn't fit with what the expectation was of Messiah. So now that they have given voice, right? Peter has represented the position of the other disciples, and they've given voice and said, you're the guy. You're the Messiah. Jesus says, you're right. And nobody taught you that. You didn't learn that from the Pharisees. You didn't learn that from the scribes. You didn't learn that from the religious leaders. You've learned that by spending time with me and by the revelation of my Father through the Spirit. That's correct. From that time, now that they know who the Messiah is, he then alerts them to the fact that their hoped for, their desired expectation of what Messiah would do and be and accomplish was way off. Way off. They were expecting military. They were expecting political. They were expecting Israel to be exalted above the surrounding nations, especially the hated Romans. And Jesus puts an end to that popular theory instantaneously when he says, the Son of Man is going to go to Jerusalem, he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be crucified, and on the third day he's going to rise again. And they were like, whoa, what? What? No, you're not, that's not going to happen, right? Because the idea of a crucified Messiah is so oxymoronic, it sounds like crazy talk, right? It sounds like silent loudness or invisible rainbow or a dry ocean or a wet desert or a square circle like a crucified Messiah? No. This is why Paul will say decades later when we come into towns and villages in the greater Mediterranean world and we preach a crucified Messiah, people are like, what? That's crazy. He says to some it's foolishness and to others it's a scandal. Okay? So this idea did not compute. Right? There was no sense in which they were going to be able to overturn centuries of military political expectation and just in a moment be like, oh, okay, so you're going to go to Jerusalem, you're going to be betrayed, be crucified, and raised the third day. Got it. No, they resisted. And not only did they resist it intellectually, spiritually, psychologically, etc., they resisted it verbally. Peter's like, this is not going to happen to you. Not going to happen. To which Peter then receives a rebuke from Jesus, get behind me, Satan, and you don't savor the things of God, but the things of men. And he says to them, not only am I going to take up my cross, you're going to take up your cross. And now they're just like, so Jesus has come. Messiah has come apparently not to conquer the Romans, but to be conquered by them. A crucified Messiah, a dry ocean, a wet desert, a square circle. What are you talking about? But Jesus spoke with such certainty and such authority, and they were persuaded that he was the Messiah, that they are depressed. And you might remember, let me just read you the last sentence of the previous chapter. Remember this? Just listen to this last sentence of the previous chapter. This is chapter 45. It says, thus they sorrowed and doubted, hoped and feared for 6 long, gloomy days. That's great language, and it's language that's pregnant with tension, right? They sorrowed and doubted, yeah. They hoped and feared. Wow, that's a weird juxtaposition. For 6 long, gloomy days. So that's how Matthew chapter 16 basically ends, with Jesus complete recomputing, recalibrating, refiguring, the initial refiguring in the minds of the disciples what Messiah was going to do and what he was not going to do. And they are befuddled, they are confused, they are incredulous, they are discouraged, and they're quiet. They're quiet. They're not saying anything. So it's with that context in mind that we come to Matthew chapter 17. And in Matthew chapter 17, let's just read, just as we just did a moment ago. We read the last sentence of the previous chapter. Now let's read the last verse of the previous chapter. So this is Matthew chapter 16, verse 28. Jesus speaking, Matthew 16:28, which in my Bible, if you look here, 16:28 is actually grouped in topically with 17:1. Okay? And there's good reason for that. Because this kind of mysterious, enigmatic thing that Jesus says in 16:28 flows very naturally and natively with the Mount of Transfiguration experience. But if you stick it up there with verses 24, 25, 26, 27, it kind of is just hanging, dangling out there like, what? I don't understand that. But listen to this. Jesus says, "Assuredly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Well, that sounds very immediate. That sounds very right around the corner. There are people right here alive, Jesus says, who are going to see the Son of Man coming in glory in his kingdom. Well, that seems to be at cross purposes with what he had just said moments before, that the Son of Man is going to go, he's going to be in Jerusalem, he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be crucified, and yet now he's going to come in his glory. So it sounds like a little bit like gobbledygook to the disciples. But that tension, that pregnant tension, will be resolved in the story of the Mount of Transfiguration. Now we're in chapter 17, verse 1. So I'm just going to read down to verse, looks like it's verse 8. "Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him." Whoa, this is unusual. This is unexpected. This is miraculous. "Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, 'Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.' While he was speaking," I love that, "behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came from the cloud saying, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him.'" In other words, Peter, with all due respect, shut up, stop planning, stop talking, and listen to Jesus. This is not a time for talking. This is a time for listening and learning, right? Verse 6. "And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. But Jesus came and touched them and said, 'Arise and do not be afraid.' And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one save Jesus only." Okay, that's the Matthew account. I am going to read the Luke account. So let me just put my ribbon here, and I want you to hear this, because there is a crucially important detail in the Luke account that really makes it pop. Okay, so I'm in Luke chapter 9, if you want to follow along, verse 27. And look here again. In Luke 9:27, this notion here about there are some standing here that will not taste death until they see the kingdom, notice how that's grouped together with the Sermon on the Mount, because this is where it makes sense in the flow of the narrative. Okay? Remember that the verses and the chapterization, that was added much later. This would have just flowed in Matthew's gospel, Luke's gospel, and Mark's gospel. So I'm going to read it here. Luke chapter 9, verse 27. "But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the kingdom of God. Now it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings that he took Peter, John, and James, and they went up on a mountain to pray. And as he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered." Oh, interesting. So transfigured in Matthew, altered in Luke. He was changed, transformed, transfigured. "And his robe became white and glistening. And behold, 2 men talked with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease." Crucially important detail. "And spoke of his decease." Matthew did not disclose the nature of the conversation, but Luke, being the good investigative journalist that he was, he had asked questions about that. What specifically was said there? Oh, they were talking about Jesus' forthcoming death, which is a perfect flow from what we've just been discussing in Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus revealed to them, after they had announced and gotten the correct answer that he was the Messiah, that he was going to die. And they're like, no, you're not going to die. That's not what Messiahs do. Messiahs don't die, they kill, right? Messiahs aren't conquered, they conquer. And so this is a crucially important detail. "Who appeared," it says, "who appeared in glory," that's Moses and Elijah, "and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. But Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. And when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Then it happened as they were parting from him that Peter said to Jesus, 'Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah,' not knowing what he said." I love that. Luke's like, he didn't know what he was talking about. I just love that. Yeah. Peter did not know what he was talking about. That's what he says. Verse 34, while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were fearful as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved son, listen to him. Again, this isn't a time for talking. This is a time for listening and learning. Then finally, verse 36, this is a key verse as well. And when the voice had ceased, Jesus was found alone, but they kept quiet and told no one in those days of any of the things that they had seen. Okay. Whoa, there's a lot going on here in this account. We could also read the Mark 9 account. There's a couple little details there as well, but for our purposes, we're gonna hang our study, our walk through chapter 46 on the Matthew account and the Luke account. The Mount of Transfiguration experience follows hard on the heels of Jesus' revelation about his forthcoming death. And Ellen White gets the chronology exactly right here. It's not difficult to get it right, of course, because Matthew 17 follows Matthew chapter 16. The announcement of his death, his forthcoming death, which chapter 45 is what? The foreshadowing of the cross. And then, hard on the heels of that, is some encouragement, some needed encouragement. Jesus sensed that the disciples were hanging by a thread. Right? You'd already had that problematic encounter and situation in the synagogue in Capernaum, except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood. You have no life in you. Lots of people walking away. Jesus now announcing that he's going to be killed. He's spending a lot of time hanging out with the heathen. He's completely alienated or been alienated from the religious leaders. Like, a lot of things aren't adding up here. And Jesus senses, as she says there, those 6 long, gloomy days where they hoped and feared and doubted and were discouraged. So Jesus is going to pray for some supernatural manifestation, not primarily for himself. Not that he's not going to benefit from it. Of course he is. But what he's primarily praying for is that the disciples will have some revelation. Now, in fairness here, I look at that and I think, haven't they had sufficient revelation? Like healing upon healing upon healing, wonder upon wonder upon wonder, like wisdom upon wisdom upon wisdom. But again, this is Monday morning quarterbacking. We're looking back with the benefit of hindsight, the benefit of retrospect, and we're saying, come on, it's so obvious. But for the disciples who were moving through this in real time, Jesus senses that their faith was hanging by an increasingly threadbare thread. And so he's like, Peter, James, John, come with me. Come with me. And he takes them up onto a mountain. And they get up, and I love the way that Ellen White paints this, by the way. I actually wrote here in the margin, beautiful. So let's just read paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. You ready? Here we go. Evening is drawing on as Jesus calls to his side 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and leads them across the fields and far up a rugged path to a lonely mountainside. The Savior and his disciples have spent all day in traveling, teaching, and the mountain climb adds to their weariness. One thing I really like about Jesus, I've got to say, he spends a lot of time in the mountains, right? And one of my all-time favorite quotations is John Muir, "The mountains are calling and I must go." I actually wrote a song about that. And someday you'll get to hear it maybe. I hope to record my own album of original songs before I turn 50, or sometime during my 50th year. It's been a long-time goal of mine to write I've already written a bunch of songs, but to record them and to make them available. It's kind of terrifying for me because I'm not an incredible musician, but I have some things I'd like to say, and I wrote a song about that quotation. The mountains are calling and I must go. And Jesus here, you get this sense that he's drawn to mountains. And so even though it's been a long day, and even though he's tired and they're tired, he's like, hey, let's hike to the top of that mountain. And so they're like, well, okay. Christ has lifted burdens from the mind and body of many sufferers. He has sent the thrill of life through their enfeebled frames, but he is also compassed with humanity, and with his disciples, he is wearied with the ascent. So Jesus is going up on this mountain. Not all of his disciples, 3 of the disciples are following in tow. Next paragraph, and I thought this was beautiful. Anybody who's spent much time in the mountains will know this experience and know it well. Okay? She captures it perfectly. The light of the setting sun still lingers upon the mountaintop and gilds with its fading glory the path they are traveling. But soon the light dies out from hill as well as valley, and the sun disappears behind the western horizon, and the solitary travelers are wrapped in the darkness of night. The gloom of their surroundings seems in harmony with their sorrowful lives around which the clouds are gathering and thickening. And again, anyone who's spent much time in the mountains knows that experience of that beautiful evening alpine glow, the way the mountains are lit, and it's just glorious, but it's short-lived. Very often it's short-lived, and as soon as that sun disappears behind the mountain, it gets really cold and really dark really quick, right? And so I've had that experience so many times rock climbing, being out in the mountains, whether I'm in the Sierras or the Rockies or somewhere, and you're just out there with your friends. You're maybe, cragging at some small cliff, or maybe you're climbing with a partner and you're, 500 or 600 feet up a 1,000-foot cliff, and you're having the time of your life, and you're in the sun, and you've got your jacket off, and it's tight around your waist, and you're climbing, but you still have several hundred feet to go, and you get that beautiful evening glow. And as an experienced rock climber, or a person that spent a lot of time in the mountains, as a mountaineer, you know what's coming, right? That beautiful evening glow is your signal to get to the top of the route and get down as quickly as possible. Because, and I've experienced this, as soon as that sun goes behind the mountain, it's just like everything changes. The world changes. Your sense changes. You get cold. You get jittery. You were having a great time just 20 minutes before, and now you're like, whoa, I need to get off of this mountain. I need to get down. I need to get back to camp. It can happen like that, right? And it's amazing how your spirits can be lifted really high with the sun and the air, and then all of a sudden, you're like, whoa, everything has changed. And that's the experience that the disciples have. It's beautiful, they're tired, they're weary, and they get that beautiful little scene just before darkness. And then she says that the darkness of the surrounding mountains matches the darkness in their hearts. They're like, what? What? And for 6 days, 6 days, they basically walked in silence. And she even says, it's quite funny there, she says, even Peter, right, had nothing to say. Right? Even Peter was quiet as they're walking and talking. So now this amazing thing happens. Jesus goes up onto a mountain, and he is altered in the Lucan account, or he's transfigured in Matthew's account. He's changed, is what it means. He's changed in some wonderfully incandescent, luminous way, right? It's just like, and they're kind of half asleep. Remember, in fact, this whole section here, on page 493 of the Types and Symbols, 421 of the original, I just wrote here in the margin, I don't know if you can see that, but I just wrote in the margin, this section sounds very much like Gethsemane, right? When she paints that picture of the sleepy disciples and the dew gathering on the frame of Jesus, and Jesus crying out with strong prayers and tears, and it feels very Gethsemane. And that might be purposeful, because what happens here is that supernatural encouragement is sent to Jesus and to his disciples in a time of significant need. But that encouragement is not sent in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Jesus has to endure. He was numbered with the transgressors. And so there does seem to me, in that long paragraph there that begins, presently Christ tells them that they are now to go no further, there seems to be a purposeful sort of nod to the Gethsemane experience. And then I'll just read right from that paragraph. The Savior has seen the gloom of his disciples and has longed to lighten their grief by an assurance that their faith has not been in vain. We've made this point, but we'll make it again. Jesus is more concerned with his disciples' welfare and his disciples' needs and the needs of those around him than he is with his own. Okay, so he's very often thinking strategically and pedagogically, how can I set my disciples up for success? Jesus isn't just a teacher, he's a trainer. He's like a coach. He's a trainer, coach, mentor, teacher. And so he's always thinking ahead for his students, for his devotees, for his understudies, for his pupils. How can I set them up for success? It's absolutely incredible. And so he goes up and he prays on this mountain. And he prays specifically, she says this, I'm in that same paragraph, that they might be given a manifestation of the glory that he had with the Father before the world was. And then just a sentence later, that they might witness a manifestation of his divinity that will comfort them in the hour of his supreme agony, with the knowledge that he is of a surety the Son of God, and that his shameful death is a part of the plan of salvation. That's a reference to, of course, the cross, which again, you can just see how that flow, that seamless flow from 16 to 17 makes so much sense, right? Who do people say I am? Some say you're this, some say you're this. Who do you say I am? You're the Christ. Okay, let me tell you what Christ is going to do and be, and what he's not going to do and be. From that time on, you just get this strong sense that the whole Gospel of Matthew now tilts into the second half of the life and ministry of Jesus, or at least the second half of the Gospel, which is about right, because there's 28 chapters in Matthew. We're in Matthew chapter 16, heading into 17 now, so it's about halfway, and we're tilting. We're tilting now into the latter half, and everything, if this was a cinematic score, those low bass notes and those low cello notes would begin sounding to alert the listener, to alert the viewer, there is danger on the horizon. And the disciples are feeling that. And Jesus is feeling that the disciples are feeling that. And so he goes up, not thinking primarily of himself, but thinking of his disciples. Their threadbare faith, just barely hanging on. And he's like, God, show them, because they're trying to overcome in 6 gloomy days centuries of misunderstanding about the nature of Messiah. That's not going to happen. People don't just unlearn in a moment things that have been inculcated into them by family, by theology, by culture, by nationalism. They're not going to unlearn that in a moment. That takes a while. So they need a little boost. They need a little nitrous oxide of a miracle to sort of set them up. And even in the midst of their questions. Now, I love this. I'm on the next page, 494, 421 of the original. And this is so cool. It reminds me, years ago, I read a National Geographic article about this weather scientist who was trying to get a picture of lightning, because we have a lot of really cool pictures of lightning. You've seen these amazing pictures where these like almost tree root looking, bolts are coming down. And we've got a lot of great pictures of lightning. But what this weather scientist was trying to do was he had this incredible camera that took, I don't remember what it was. It was an amazing number of frames per second, right? And this was probably 10 years ago, so camera technology hadn't quite developed to where it is now. But he would travel, he would follow storms, and he would try to take pictures of the exact moment that lightning did the thing that lightning does. And it was, I think, known, or maybe not fully known, but he took a picture of the moment, and it was featured in National Geographic, and this is so cool. So what's happening with lightning is, the current is coming down from above, but there's also a current coming up from the bottom to meet. And so what happens is that they meet in the middle, and he wanted to capture that, not in the middle, but they meet at some point on the journey, the current coming down and the current coming up from the earth, and he wanted to capture that moment of touch, and he did. He captured it. It was incredible. And the pictures were in National Geographic. I read the article at least once, maybe twice. I mean, it was so cool. And it took him a long time, like years and years of taking tens and tens and tens of thousands of images to capture that one moment that happens, in a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of a second. It just happens. She described something very similar to this. Listen to this. And I just wrote in the margin, cool. And this is the picture that came into my mind. Listen to this. It says, okay, I'm just going to read the sentence before this. His prayer is heard while he is bowed in lowliness upon the stony ground. Suddenly the heavens open. The golden gates of the city of God are thrown wide, and holy radiance descends upon the mount, enshrouding the Savior's form. Now listen to this. Divinity from within flashes through humanity and meets the glory coming from above, arising from his prostrate position. Whoa, can't you see this? Christ stands in godlike majesty. Yes, that happened, friends. That happened. And can't you see it? Like the divinity, you get the sense here almost that divinity is finding it difficult to be constrained by the garb of humanity. This earnest prayer, this sincere prayer, the tears, the longing for his disciples to see it, to get it, to understand it. It's like humanity is about ready to burst because divinity is shining through, and it rockets up, and the divinity from the Father comes down, and it's like nuclear. Wow, I can just see this in my mind's eye. I mean, and then, so Jesus is irradiated. He's incandescent with his own glory and with the glory of the Father, and this begins to wake up the disciples. They're like, groggily sort of looking up, and they're like, probably thinking it's a dream, right? Like, this is exceedingly supernatural. They've not seen anything like this, right? The voice from heaven that had happened at Jesus' baptism, "This is my beloved son," that was supernatural. The healings have been supernatural. The water to wine has been supernatural. But those were all tame. And what I mean by tame is they were all the kinds of things that sort of fit within the reality to which human beings are accustomed. This was nuclear. This was alien, right? Not alien in the like extraterrestrial weird Roswell sense, but alien in the sense that it was foreign to this earth. It was like, right? Like all of a sudden Jesus is unlike they've ever seen him before. And thus the phrase or the word transfigured or altered, right? This is Jesus in glory. And it's exactly what the disciples have needed. Now, what makes this even more remarkable is that the disciples are sort of wiping the sleep from their eyes and trying to get their minds around what's happening. They see two figures standing adjacent to Jesus. Now, it's puzzling to think that they knew that this was Moses and Elijah. How do they know that? Okay, had they been following Moses on Instagram and they'd seen what his face looked like, they knew that that's Moses, he always dresses like that, that's what Moses looks like, that's what Elijah looks like? No, of course not. So how do they know? How do they know? I just heard Ty talk about, I think it was a sermon that he preached recently, or maybe it was a talk that I had with him or something. It was actually a conversation we were having with friends about a week ago. And he was saying that the idea to know what you look like to know exactly what you look like, is a fairly modern phenomenon, right? Like, yes, they've always had mirrors, kind of, like, they had these like polished silver mirrors, or you could look at yourself in still water and get a sense of what you look like. But to know what we look like now in the sense that you know what you look like, because we have these mirrors and we have video cameras, and we have high definition cameras, that's kind of a modern thing. Right? Like to know what you look like. In fact, C.S. Lewis wrote the book that he regarded as his best work of fiction, which is an incredible book that I've read, probably 3 times. An incredible book, but a difficult to read book for a variety of reasons. Because you basically have to wade through like the first 400 pages and you're like, what? And the book doesn't really make sense until like the last 5 pages. And it's a book called Till We Have Faces. And one of the major scenes in that book is when one of the figures, one of the king's daughters, sees herself in a mirror. Right? Like the idea that and she sees that she's ugly. Right? Like she's ugly by the standards of the day, the standards of beauty of the day. And her father had always referred to her as ugly, but she sees herself anyway. I don't want to give any of the book away. But the point is just that the idea that you would know what you look like is a fairly modern idea. And so how do the disciples know that that's Moses and that's Elijah? They don't even know what they look like, right? Like as individuals. And the answer is that detail in the Luke account. They were talking about his decease. They overheard the conversation. And they're like, that must be Moses in glory. That must be Elijah in glory. Now, why Moses and why Elijah? And I just noted down here 3 similarities between Moses and Jesus. And there are more, but I'll just give you 3 real quick. And then 3 similarities between Elijah and Jesus, okay? And you can find some of your own, but this is great. Applefig 1668 says, all women are beautiful. Of course, I believe that. Everybody is beautiful. In fact, in the inimitable words of C.S. Lewis, C.D. Brooks, I might have even said this recently, but C.D. Brooks said in a sermon I listened to years ago, he said, I have never seen an uglier woman. All women are attractive. It's your attitude that makes you ugly. And I loved it. He used to say, it's your attitude that makes you ugly. So yes, I'm with you. I'm just telling you the story of the book. So back to the similarities here between Moses and Jesus and Elijah and Jesus. Okay? So here we go. Let's start with Moses. First of all, Moses led a ragtag band of questioning, doubting Israelites. So did Jesus. Number 2, Moses was frequently misunderstood. So was Jesus. Number 3, Moses died an untimely and unexpected death that broke the heart of his followers. So did Jesus. And I'll add fourthly, this is important, Moses knew what it was to be alone in the midst of a large group of people. So did Jesus. Okay, so that's Moses and Jesus. How about Elijah? Elijah and Jesus. Number one, Elijah knew what it was like to be rejected by his own people and to be lonely. Right? Elijah is the one that says famously to God, I am left. Right? So that's number one for Elijah. Number two for Elijah, he knew what it was to be a spiritual and even a political outsider. So did Jesus. Number three with Elijah, he knew what it was to be overwhelmed by the enormity of his work, the work that lay before him, particularly with regards to the apostasy of Israel and the backsliding of Israel. He knew what it was to be overwhelmed. And, like Moses, I'll add fourthly, he knew what it was to be lonely in the midst of his own nation, his own people. So Moses and Elijah are strategically chosen, but we just need to briefly note that it does not follow biblically that because Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration in glory, that means that everybody that's ever died is in glory. No, Scripture's abundantly clear on this, that when you die, you sleep the sleep of death and await the resurrection. However, there are exceptions to this, and Elijah is an exception, as described in 1 Kings 17, 18, 19, 20, etc., where Elijah is taken to heaven in a fiery chariot without seeing death. So it stands to reason that Elijah could be with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. But what about Moses? Well, Moses did die, but he was resurrected, and there's no reference to this in Scripture that I'm aware of, except for one reference in Jude chapter 1, verse 9. And it says, but Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. Okay, so Moses was resurrected. Ellen White actually references this. She says that, she quotes the beautiful prayer of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 3, that he might go into the promised land, but he wasn't permitted to go into the promised land. And we talked about this before, how Moses, as a symbol of the law, can only get us to the borders of the promised land. The baton is handed to Jesus, Yeshua, Joshua, who takes us into the promised land. Boom. Don't forget that. Moses cannot get you into Canaan. He can only get you to the borders of Canaan. Joshua, Jesus, Messiah, takes us into Canaan. Okay? So, Moses says, please let me go into Canaan, please let me go. God says, no. He dies, that untimely death atop, what was it, Mount Nebo, and then, or was that Aaron that died atop Mount Nebo? It was one or the other, maybe it was both. Moses dies, and then, guess what? He's resurrected. So it stands to reason that Moses and Elijah could appear with Jesus atop the Mount of Transfiguration, because Elijah never saw death and Moses was resurrected. And she says that these two represented, she uses that word twice. I'll just read it to you here. Page 494 and 421 of the original. Here we go. Moses upon the Mount of Transfiguration was a witness to Christ's victory over sin and death. He represented those who will come forth from the grave at the resurrection of the righteous. Bingo. Okay. Elijah, who had been translated to heaven without seeing death, represented those who will be living on earth at Christ's second coming and who will be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. That is so cool, my friends. I just want you to feel how awesome that is, how cool and symmetrical that is. And what we have here then, check this out. A cloud then comes and overshadows the mountain. Okay, the cloud overshadows the mountain. This has all kinds of overtones. This has the overtones of Sinai, right? This has the overtones of the baptism. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Friends, you know what this is? This is a little miniature, and she says it. This is a miniature of the second coming of Jesus. There's the Father in his glory. There's the cloud, because when Jesus is described as returning, it's clouds, 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 clouds. Those are clouds of angels, right? They look like clouds to the prophetic eye because there were so many angels returning in incandescent glory. So you have the glory of the Father, the voice of the Father, the clouds, the glory of Jesus, those that are resurrected, i.e. those represented by Moses, those that are translated without seeing death, i.e. those that are represented by Elijah. And so this is like a little trailer version, a little mini version of the second coming. And that is just so cool. It is just amazing. It's beautiful. It's glorious. It's grand. It's symmetrical. It's attractive. It's illuminating. It's phenomenal. And the disciples saw it. They witnessed it, right? They saw this. And so she says it here. Upon the mount, the future kingdom of glory was represented in miniature, which I just thought was so, so cool. And this is where Peter speaks up, right? Like, God bless Peter. I have been told by many people over the years, you're a lot like Peter. And I'm like simultaneously insulted and flattered, right? Like Peter was such an amazing person. And I like to think of Peter as someone who was always swinging for the fences. Like Peter was never going to bunt. Peter was never going to hit a single, right? Like Peter was either going to strike out, in humiliating fashion, or he was going to hit a home run. It's one or the other with Peter. It's this or it's that. There's no halfway with Peter. He's either going to say exactly the right thing, like he just did moments before, right? A few days before. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. God bless you, Simon, son of Jonah. Nobody taught you that. Home run. Well, here's a moment to listen, to learn, to take it in, to understand, to worship, to be in that moment of unique and supernatural, incandescent glory. And Peter, the loudmouth, is like, I got a great idea. Let's build 3 tabernacles. And then he's going on and on. Peter was talking so much that the gospel accounts make it clear that God himself had to interrupt him. And that's actually kind of funny. You know that you're a loudmouth when God is the one that has to interrupt you, right? Like God interrupts and says, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. In other words, this is not a time for talking. This is a time for learning and listening. Shut up. And this is a time for shutting up. But Peter, his intentions were good, right? He's like, let's stay here forever. Let's stay on this mountain forever. But this is one of the great key themes of the whole chapter. And I'm going to read it to you here. Let's see if I've got it. Oh, no. That's next chapter. I was getting confused. Next chapter. We'll come back to that. Okay, so now we get to this paragraph that begins, but before the crown must come the cross. And we're almost done with this chapter. Before the crown, the cross. I'm going to read that paragraph. But before the crown must come the cross, not the inauguration of Christ as king, but the decease to be accomplished at Jerusalem is the subject of their conference with Jesus, Moses and Elijah's conversation. Luke refers to that. Bearing the weakness of humanity and burdened with its sorrow and sin, Jesus walked alone in the midst of men, like Moses, like Elijah. As the darkness of the coming trial pressed upon him, he was in loneliness of spirit in a world that knew him not. Even his loved disciples, absorbed in their own doubt and sorrow and ambitious hopes, had not comprehended the mystery of his mission. He had dwelt in the love and fellowship of heaven, but in the world that he had created, he was in solitude. Now heaven had sent its messengers to Jesus, not angels, but men who had endured suffering and sorrow, who could sympathize with the Savior in the trial of his earthly life. Jump down just a couple sentences. Elijah had known loneliness of spirit. As for 3 years and a half of famine, he had borne the burden of the nation's hatred in its woe. Alone he had stood for God upon Mount Carmel. Alone he had fled to the desert in anguish and despair. Last sentence of that paragraph. The hope for the world, the salvation of every human being, was the burden of their interview. And you can understand, like Moses and Elijah, they've got a dog in the race here, right? They've got skin in the game because their continued residence in glory hinges on Jesus successfully executing his mission. So they're vested here, right? They've got skin in the game. They're like, Jesus, you've got to pull through. We are in the presence of God. We are in the presence of the angels. This is going to work. Yes, they're doubting. Yes, they're depressed. Yes, they're unbelieving. Yes, you're being rejected. Yes, the cross is in front of you. But take it from us. We're letting you know, as redeemed humans, redeemed in promise, Jesus is now executing the promise. He's in the midst of the promise, and they are anticipatory. They're saying almost from the future, so to speak. Because remember, Hebrews chapter, 12 says that Jesus, who for the joy that was before him endured the cross, despising the shame. So they're almost like messengers from the future saying, it's worth it. Hang in there, not just for us. I mean, we know that Moses is a magnanimous person. Moses was the one who said on top of Sinai summit, when God said, I'm going to blot them out, I'm going to start fresh with you. Moses said, no. Blot me out and start with them. Right? Moses was not a selfish or self-interested person. He was motivated by God-like selflessness and magnanimity. In fact, I learned this poem years and years ago, beautiful poem, and it goes like this, talking about how Moses and Paul both were willing to sacrifice their own standing with God so that others might be saved, which is the pinnacle of godliness. It's the pinnacle of godliness. It's what Jesus did when he was forsaken. And there's this great poem that goes like this. The fear of hell, or aiming to be blessed, savors too much of private interest. This moved not Moses nor zealous Paul, who for others sacrificed life and all. So we know that when Moses is cheering on and when Elijah is cheering on, they're not cheering on out of self-interest. They're cheering on saying, this is going to work. It's going to be awesome. Jesus, press on toward the mark. Yes, the cross is ugly, and yes, it's humiliating, and yes, the clouds of opposition are surrounding you on every front, but the glory on the other side of the cross, the joy on the other side of the cross, press. And Moses and Elijah were uniquely qualified to give this encouragement. The angels themselves could not have given this level of encouragement. They don't know what it's like to be redeemed. The angels don't know what it's like to be resurrected, to be taken from heaven in a fiery chariot without seeing death. I mean, they are uniquely positioned to encourage Jesus, which is why it's so awesome and important that in the Luke account, it says they were talking about his death. And again, Elijah and Moses have skin in the game here. They got a dog in this race. They themselves have experienced the glory. They're like a little promise. They're a promise to Jesus that it's going to work out and it's going to be worth it. What a beautiful story this is. Man, on every level, it's so encouraging. You will recall that Peter will later reference the Mount of Transfiguration in 2 Peter chapter 1 when he says that we were eyewitnesses of his majesty on the mountain. In fact, let me just read you that. 2 Peter chapter 1, let me just go find that real quick and read that section because it's so powerful. This is Peter looking back retrospectively. 2 Peter chapter 1. Let's see if we can find this here. I think it's 2 Peter chapter 1. Oh yeah, listen to this. Listen to this. So this is a well-known passage of Scripture, but many of us have maybe not known that this is given in the context of Peter's recollection of the Transfiguration, of the mountain experience that he had with James and John. Listen to this, 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16. For we have not followed cunningly devised fables. The Greek word there is muthos, like the word myth. We didn't follow fairy tales. We didn't follow myths. We didn't follow tales. For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came from him from the excellent glory. The excellent glory. Like language is failing Peter to describe that, nuclear fusion that took place when the glory went up and the glory came down and illuminated the sky that fateful evening. He calls it such excellent glory. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And we heard this voice, says Peter, which came from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. Phenomenal. Peter's remembering that experience. That experience was emblazoned. It was tattooed on the mind of Peter and of John. At the time, he did not fully understand it. But later, upon reflection, he was like, man, that was a moment. That was a solidifying, galvanizing moment. And of course, you have the announcement, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, very much like the baptism. And then they fall on their face. They're afraid, just like the Israelites were afraid at Mount Sinai. As I've said before, this has a lot of Sinai overtones, and we've only just hinted at them. Okay? But then Jesus comes. This is another Sinai overtone. Jesus comes to them and says, arise and do not be afraid. I have to say again that do not be afraid or fear not or do not fear, some permutation of that basic message is the most frequently repeated command in all of Scripture, occurring more than 400 times. God's message to humanity is do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. In fact, one of the weirdest verses in the Bible, can I read you this? I actually preached on this recently for a Zoom meeting that I did for like 3,000 people from Poland. Just did it like a week ago, and I preached on this verse. You want to hear one of the weirdest verses in the Bible? It's found in Exodus chapter 20. It's a funny verse. It's a verse that sounds almost internally contradictory and incoherent. Exodus chapter 20, verse 20. Exodus chapter 20, of course, is the Ten Commandments. And now listen to this. Exodus 20:20. This is, okay, I'll start it in verse 18. It says, now all the people witnessed the thundering, the lightning, the flashes. This is Sinai, right? This is Sinai. They've just come out of Israel. They've just come out of Egypt. Israel has just come out of Egypt. They're at the base of Sinai. The God at the top of that mountain is not like the gods of the Egyptians made of wood or of stone or of metal that never did anything or said anything or... No, this is a real God, a living God, and frankly, a terrifying God at the top of that mountain. And they don't know what to do with a God that's not made of wood or of stone that doesn't do anything. So they're freaking. Okay, so Exodus chapter 20, verse 18, listen to this. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightnings, the flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Okay, see, very much like the Mount of Transfiguration. God shows up, the voice shows up, the lightning shows up, right? And the people are afraid. Peter, James, and John, they're afraid. Verse 19. Then they said to Moses, you talk to God and we will listen. But don't let God speak to us or we're going to die. Okay, now verse 20, which is kind of this internally, seemingly incoherent verse. Check this out. Then Moses said to the people, this is one of the 400 times, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid of the smoking mountain and the loud voice, right, and the shaking of the earth. Do not be afraid because God has come down to test you that his fear may be before you, that you may not sin. Okay, let me just paraphrase that. Moses basically comes to the Israelites and says, no. Don't be afraid. God has just come down to make you afraid. Don't be afraid. God's just trying to scare you. Right? That's kind of what he says. It's actually exactly what he says. And here's the point. One of the great paradoxes is that we are fearful of God in the sense of the largeness, the incomprehensible grandness of his nature and his power and his majesty. And when that flashes, when that manifests, whether it's angelic or a flash here in both the Old and the New Testaments, people fall right down and they're like, whoa, I'm in the presence of the Almighty. And they freak out. You would do the same. I would do the same. Everybody would do the same. Okay, but then God's saying, yeah, that's my nature. That's who I am. Don't be afraid of it because this is who I am. And his character says to us, don't be afraid. Right? In a weird way, not to create, an awkward tension here, but just in a weird way, maybe this will help you to see it. God's character says, don't be afraid of my nature. Right? My nature is such as it is. I'm God. I'm omnipotent. I am I created the universe. And if I just showed up in glory, you would instantly perish. Yeah, I know that sounds a little terrifying, but I'm actually the guy that looks like Jesus, like little children sitting on my lap and hanging out with the tax collectors and talking to a Samaritan woman. That's who I am. Right? God can't help what he is by nature. So what he does is he garbs himself in humanity to show us his character, what he's like. And so the message of Jesus to the disciples is the consistent message of God in Scripture. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid because God is not against you. God is for you. He's for you big time, really big time. Okay, let's do our rubric here, and then I'll tell you my word. So my word for this chapter was alone. Alone. And I'll be very interested to see what your word is. But before you start sending them, because I want to see them, so don't start sending them right away. Just listen to this. I'm just going to read you. I won't tell you exactly where these are at. But Just listen to this. A lonely mountainside, the solitary travelers. Jesus walked alone in the midst of men. He was in loneliness. He was in solitude. Elijah had known loneliness of spirit. Alone he had stood. Alone he had fled again and again. And then finally, listen to the very last sentence of the whole chapter. Here's the last sentence of the whole chapter. They were upon the mountain alone with Jesus. That's cool. That's very cool. So alone captures a lot here. It captures that Jesus was alone. It captures that sometimes we're called to be alone. In fact, I'll tell you something. Years ago, like 12 years ago, don't tell me your word yet. I'll come back to it in just a second. Probably like 12 years ago, I wrote a sermon that I preached only one time. Maybe I preached it twice. And I thought the sermon was such a cool idea, but it was really hard to execute. And the sermon was called, if you heard this sermon, you'd be one of very few because I only preached it twice. The sermon was called, You Are Not Alone, But You Are, But You Aren't. That was the title of the sermon. You are not alone, but you are, but you aren't. And the premise of the sermon is built around the story of Elijah. And the premise of the sermon was this. You're not alone. There are other people, because remember Elijah said, I'm alone. I'm the last one. And God's like, no, I have 7,000. I have 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. So you are not alone. There's other people that have had an experience. But you are alone. Because even though others have had an experience similar to yours, they've not had an identical experience to yours, and you're alone in your own experience, in your own head, and life can be scary. And I will only say that I was in a home, without giving away too many details here, I was in a home where one of the significant members of my family experienced lifelong, chronic, clinical depression. Okay, and still to some degree suffers from it, but they've been able to treat it, and it's been an ongoing struggle for this person in my family. And while I have not been depressed in the clinical sense, and maybe you haven't, lots of people have, and even for those of us that are not depressed in the clinical sense, we all know what it is to feel alone. So you are not alone in that there's a community, there's others around you, but you are alone in the sense that life can be hard, and you can feel like you're trapped inside your own world. You're trapped inside your own head. You're trapped inside your own unique experience. You are not alone, but you are, but you aren't. Because Jesus is with us. And Jesus has access to those intimate places in our heart of hearts. And I love how this chapter ends. They were alone with Jesus on the mountain. Think of this sort of tension, the linguistic tension there. Alone with Jesus on the mountain. And friends, I love the idea that we are alone in the world. I mean, I don't know if you feel like I feel, but I sometimes watch the news, or I go on social media, or I try to watch a movie on an airplane, and I'm like, this is not entertaining to me. I just feel like this world is like an itchy sweater that doesn't fit quite right. You're just like, man, am I alone here? I just feel like this world is not my home. And I know that many of you feel that way, and I take great consolation in the fact that I'm not alone in feeling that way. But I still have to face my unique situation by myself. I have to face it internally, but I don't have to face it alone because I can be with Jesus, and I can be with you, and you can be with me, and together we can be with Jesus alone on the mountain. We have to find those places where we can meet in community, in connection with one another and with Jesus, and we gather strength from one another, from one another's shared experiences, from one another's stories, from one another's hurts and doubts and fears and trials and triumphs. And then we can feel less alone in a world that doesn't fit. This world doesn't fit us. It doesn't feel like this is where we belong. Death and disease and tragedy and separation and pain and plastic filling the oceans and little children being, dropped off at the border and just left for child trafficking, rape, tyrants, murder. What? What? We look at this stuff on the news and we're like, oh yeah, another earthquake. Yeah, killed several hundred or several thousand. Yeah, man, glad I wasn't them. Oh, another accident on the side of the highway. And we all know in our soul of souls, in our heart of hearts, this is not right. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't fit. But we're stuck here. We're stuck. But we can be stuck alone together. And we can be stuck alone with Jesus. And one day, hallelujah, in the not too distant future, we will no longer be alone. We will see face to face. And these things that cause us so much pain and so much heartache and so much distress now will melt away like the dew before the rising sun. And we will look back, and as my good friend Ty Gibson says, and I love it when he says this, someday in the distant future, we will look back on all of the tragedy, all of the terrible things that happened on this world, and it will feel like one night in a really bad hotel. Because in the grand scheme of glory upon glory and the eternal future stretching out in front of us, we're going to look back on this, and as dark as it is and as terrible as it is, it will feel in comparison and in contrast with the exceeding glory, right? That's what Peter called it, the excellent glory. It will all feel like one really bad night in a really bad hotel. And what stretches out as far as the eye can see into the distant horizon is love upon love upon love upon love. If you want to listen to a song that will, if you haven't already heard this song, you need to hear this song. It's going to make you a better person, and it's going to make your life better. You need to go listen to the song by an artist named Andrew Peterson. Andrew Peterson. And you need to listen to the song After the Last Tear Falls. Please do this for me. Please do this for me. Go find that song, After the Last Tear Falls, and put on your headphones or put in your earbuds or get in a quiet room and listen to that song and read the lyrics if you can find them. They're easy to find online. And you will have a religious experience. Trust me on that. After the last tear falls, because in the grand climax of that song, he just has the great end where he says that what stretches out is love, love, love. As far as the eye can see, love, love, love. Go listen to that song. Please do it. As soon as this is done, listen to that song. Andrew Peterson, After the Last Tear Falls. It will change your life. It will be a religious experience for you. Okay. All right, so that's chapter 46.